Does boost limit break potency apply to summon damage? And what's up with boost attack, physical attack, and magical attack? They have a plus number slash a plus percentage number. If these are questions you've ever asked, stick around because I've got the answers. Hey, it's Nightlight9, and in this video we're going to be covering our abilities, answering some common questions and misconceptions, and also giving a full analysis of each of them and how you could use them when you're setting up your teams. Now, the first R abilities that I want to go through are boost physical attack, boost attack, and boost magic attack. And the reason I want to go through these is because, like many of the tooltips in the game, I wouldn't say that they're misleading, but they are definitely open to multiple interpretations of how they might work. And I'm showing here the boost physical attack. So we see that it says boost physical attack plus 10 slash plus 5%. And I want to demystify this a little bit because I think this is open to the interpretation that this percentage number is a multiplier to your damage whenever you're doing an ability. And as you'll see, that is not what that means. And boost attack and boost magic attack both have the same kind of thing where it's a plus number and then a slash with a plus percentage. We're going to be using Cloud here as our example. And here I've got him as equipped with as few things as possible. It makes you throw on one thing and that's totally fine. So we'll see that Cloud's physical attack is 482, his magical attack is 436. For the purpose of testing and making sure that everything is accurate, we will look at this weapon's stats. This is Iron Blade. It gives no boost to any R ability that we're testing. It gives physical attack plus 30, magical attack plus 24. And since it's the main weapon, we don't have to worry about having the stats or anything like that. So if we subtract those numbers, we could see that after doing the growth stat stream and all of that, my Cloud's base physical attack is 452, and I'm not really concerned with magical attack here because I'm going to just do physical attack because you can assume that boost magic attack is going to work the same way. And what I find to be the most useful when we're trying to determine how these abilities work is to narrow it down as much as possible. So for this, we're going to go in and we're going to find a weapon that is going to give a low boost. Hard Edge will work really well here. And one of the reasons Hard Edge works so well is because its physical attack and magical attack stats are almost identical. The only difference is one extra magic attack stat. We're not concerned with that for this testing, so the physical attack plus 30 is going to be identical. The only difference we're going to see here is this boost attack plus 2, which will put us at level 1 for the plus 5 plus 3%. If we go in and we put on Hard Edge, we can see that we go up to 501, 455. And this is where we're going to get into some math. So if we take his base stat, and again, it's not going to change, but it was 452 plus 30 for the other weapon, plus 30 for this. So same 482 is what we're working with. If we take that number 482, and as it says to do here, we're going to add 5 to that number, giving us 487, multiply by 1.03 to give us a 3% increase. We come up with 501.61, which is exactly where it gave us for physical attack. To be thorough, we'll look at one more weapon with a bigger increase just to make sure that this math still holds. So here we're looking at Mirasame, and we will note that Mirasame has 478 physical attack. We will add that to our 452 base attack, giving us 930 attack. Now, because here this is giving plus 30 to physical attack, we know that we're going to be right in here with the plus 100 plus 20%. So if we take 930, we add 100 to that, and then we multiply that by 1.2 for the 20%, we get 1236, and exactly where we are with physical attack if we equip that as our main weapon. The reason I wanted to go through this is because you can see here that both physical attack and boost attack, and by proxy also boost magic attack, is not adding a multiplier at any level as far as your damage. It is simply adding to your stats, but it adds to them 2 times, which is to me a little bit weird or redundant, but that's the way it works. So if you get a level 4 physical attack boost, you're getting your physical attack, add 100 to it, and then add 20% more to those stats. And I can tell you that As you start adding in more weapons, the math kind of becomes a little bit more complicated to figure out exactly when it starts adding those percentages in. I did do some, playing around with putting Buster Sword and Murasame on, and I can tell you that my math was always coming out to be like somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 physical attack total off, which just means that my order of operations are a little bit off as far as when multiple weapons are equipped. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to show that when you're, messing around with your builds and trying to set up for a fight, if you're looking at boost physical attack or boost magical attack or boost general attack, the only thing that you need to note is whether or not those numbers on the left here are changing. Because they should be, right? They should be going up as long as you're boosting that. But after that, whatever that number is, you're not getting any more benefit than what it's doing to that number. And I think that's important because obviously, damage multipliers like elemental potency, right? Those are numbers that do make really big differences on abilities that you're not going to see in the raw stats. So it's something to be aware of, and we will take that into consideration when we're looking at, how good we think different things are, etc. All right, and moving on to Limit Break Potency. For this test, we're going to use Lucia, and we're going to use Thunderlance. Now, we're going to try to keep everything as close as possible. So for our abilities and all of that, the only thing we're changing is the Limit Break Potency itself. All of the other buffs I'm going to make sure are exactly the same. The only slight difference is there will be just a little bit of physical or magical attack difference, because obviously when you're manipulating weapons, it's a little bit difficult to keep those identical. But the only weapon that we will be changing is the main weapon for the most part. But I'm trying to change as little bit as possible to make this testing as good as it can be. So here we will note 1,951 physical attack and 2,191 magical attack. And we will get into the fight and see how much our no potency added damage does on Thunderlance. Okay, so here we are, and we are just about there. We see Thunderlance pop up. We're going to go ahead, cast it, and wait for the magic to happen. And how much damage do we get? It looks like 10,166 damage. I froze this end screen just to show 10,166 damage was our one hit max, which was when we used the Ramuh Thunderlance. So now we'll get into the Limit Break Potency and do the test one more time. Here you can see that I've tried to swap as few weapons as possible. We'll note a 1,929 physical attack and 2,166 magical attack. Pretty darn close to our initial test. And as we go through, we will just take a look to show that this is the boost Limit Break Potency weapon that we have equipped as the main weapon. We will go over to sub equipment, show what I've done here. I just replaced her main down to a sub weapon to keep those stats as close as possible. And you'll see here the boost Limit Break Potency, this gives us level 3, so we should see a 25% increase in damage if Limit Break Potency does in fact affect summon damage. All right, we've got Thunderlance queued up. Here we go. No other summons or anything limits with it, so it's just the pure damage from Thunderlance, and we can see here 10,044 damage. And again, I've froze the end screen here just to show the one hit max was 10,044 damage. So you can see that actually equipping the potency had no impact whatsoever on our limit break damage. If it would have, we would have expected to see around 12,500 damage come out, and we didn't see that. Ultimately, Limit Break Potency is a bit ambiguous because technically you have to build your limit gauge to cast one of your summon abilities, but it is not technically a limit break, it is a summon. I guess in the end it does make sense that this doesn't work, but it is something that is very noteworthy when we're thinking about how we want to set up our characters and if we want to kind of grade or rank Limit Break Potency as an R ability. And now that we've covered those two things, we are ready to assess all of the different R abilities and help you to decide how to factor them in when you're making a build. Now, the first thing I do want to point out is physical attack, magical attack, and attack boost are all under the stats category. So again, kind of just piggybacking off of what I showed you with, my testing for boost physical attack, boost magical attack, etc., they're in the stats column. So just one more indicator to you that is the only effect they are having when you're equipping those R abilities. Going into these, I'm just going to break them down by category and then go through them one by one. Boost HP, I would say, is, top tier or second to top tier. It's one of those R abilities where you definitely need a certain threshold of it for certain fights. But after a certain point, it just becomes a little bit redundant, and there isn't a whole lot of point to having more of it. For example, if you need to be able to take a 6,000 damage hit, then obviously you want your characters to have more than 6,000 HP. However, there's not typically a time where you need them to have 8,000 HP in the same battle, but after you play a battle a couple times, you'll get a feel for how much of it you need, and I would prioritize it up to that point, but not much beyond that. Boost physical defense and boost magical defense, those are also very important. I would call those like secondary tiers because they're important in kind of niche roles. And it really depends on the fight you're going into. You don't want to neglect them entirely, but I would say you kind of base them off HP. Generally speaking, for me, the more HP a character has, the lower those stats can be, or vice versa. The higher those stats are just innately, if I set somebody up to do, let's say, as much damage as possible, and I notice that their HP is lacking, I look at their physical and magical defense stats, especially if I'm doing content that only, the boss only does one of those types, primarily physical or primarily magical. If those numbers are high enough, then I'm willing to sacrifice some of that HP or let that HP threshold be lower. Boost attack, boost physical attack, and boost magical attack I'll go over next. So I think boost physical attack and boost magical attack are the top tier for damage dealers. There are other things that are in the top tier as well, but you get the most bang for your buck out of going for pure boost physical attack or boost magical attack, depending on if that character is doing physical or magic attack abilities, or if their abilities, are using those stats in order to determine damage. And the reason I like those the best, first and foremost, is because the way that we build teams typically is you build a character to be good or excel at one type of damage between physical and magical. There's not a lot of hybridization going on at the moment because most skills only use one or the other, whether it's, materia, you're using either the blow type or the magical type, or whether you're using the ability on a weapon. A lot of the times those C abilities, they'll say either non-elemental or whatever, but it'll say physical or magical damage, meaning those are the stats that they're looking for. And these two are the fastest way to build those numbers up the highest. Boost attack here is a tier lower. It does both, which sounds kind of good, but a lot of times we just aren't building very balanced characters when it comes to damage dealing. So for that reason, this is something you want to look at after you've been able to max physical attack or magical attack, or if you can't max it, whatever the most efficient thing is, right? And unless you're able to boost this, by probably 2 levels, it's almost always going to be better to just boost one of the other physical or magical solo by 1 level. So I would say boost attack is fine, but it's not something I get really excited about on most new weapons that I'm looking for. Boost heal, this one honestly I would say is like secondary tier. I wouldn't quite call it top tier for a healer, but it can be. And the reason is this: I have noticed that when I use Aerith, if I'm able to heal for considerably more HP when I'm doing a Curaga, it makes perfect sense that means I'm going to have to heal less. Instead of feeling like I have to cast that Curaga to keep everybody topped up as soon as they're 1500 HP down, if I can now wait until they're 2000 or maybe even, 2400, 2500 down, that means that I can save that much more time or wait for one more attack before I have to cast that heal again. And what that does is it frees up your ATB gauge to cast those debuffs or those buffs that you're wanting to do. I do think boost heal is very important. I wouldn't, rank it up here only because a lot of times you're only putting that on one character and it's going to be the same character over and over, but it is very important. and so I would prioritize that pretty highly. Elemental potencies, I would say all of these are top tier, but they are niche. They're not, to me, it's like when you need them, there's nothing better. However, boost physical attack or boost magical attack, way more versatile. Again, why I liked the banners for the FF9, especially Tifa and Cloud, is because that's versatility. Boost ice potency, yeah, if you're going against an ice weak boss, it is the #1 thing you want. That's the fastest way to take him down. However, against anything else, it's probably not as good. And obviously, if they're resistant to it, that makes it completely useless. So these are all amazing, but they are a little bit niche. Not quite as much as other things because they are still very useful, but keep that in mind. Elemental resist. This is what I would probably put as like the lowest tier. Not only are they niche, but a lot of times you have to think about what kind of content you're playing. And I'm going to touch on this one more time in the special category, especially when we get to crit potency, because the way that the content that you're playing is going to have a major impact on how you're going to set up. And what I mean by this is, are you facing content that's just one boss who does one type of, elemental attack or whatever? Or are you going through a crisis dungeon where you're going to have to face 5 bosses? These resists are really taking up valuable slots if you're going to have to face multiple bosses that are doing multiple different types of elemental attacks. And while I don't think that they're useless, anytime I've prioritized these over other things, that's usually not a good sign for the content that I'm facing. Typically, I would say that means that I have a very uphill battle if I'm having to rely on resist to keep myself alive. Not to mention, it's another thing that you don't really want to spread them out. Like, it feels weird to put, unless you're doing like, a summons trial or something, it feels weird to put boost fire resist or boost wind resist on 3 different characters. And what do you do about the other ones if you don't? If you only stick it on one character, okay, so that one can survive. I don't know. I don't really like them. I think that they're kind of filler R abilities, and it's not something that I would ever really prioritize. And now here's what I think maybe is the most important category, the special category. And these are very strong abilities, but they're not all created equal. I'll start off with the easiest 2, and those are boost physical ability potency and boost magical ability potency. And really quickly, if we look in here, you can see that especially if you can start hitting the tier 3 to tier 4, I mean, you're starting to get an extremely meaningful multiplier. And again, these are multipliers, which means whenever you use abilities that use, magic, for example, with one I have up, you're getting a 45% bonus to that damage. That is insanely strong. It's the same way that elemental potency works. Obviously, there's also a weakness, hopefully, in there if you're using elemental potency, but as far as being well-rounded and doing all of your magic ability damage, this is extremely strong. And just like boost physical attack and boost magical attack, the boost ability potency is like the boost attack. It's the jack of all trades. It does both. Great for things like summon damage and limit break damage, but generally speaking, not what we're really aiming for. If you had a choice between, putting this up or putting one of the others at the same tier, you can see here, level 3, 15% to each versus 30% to one. And because your abilities are going to focus on a single type of damage between physical and magical, I'd much rather have the bigger bonus. It's not bad, and a lot of times is better than going for just raw stats to a certain degree, but not nearly as good as the top tier ones of the physical and magical boosts. So next, we'll go to Limit Break Potency. And the reason I specifically included this testing, aside from the fact that I think it needed to be cleared up, is that, to me, this is pretty trash. I'll say it. For some content, it's going to be good, but the fact of the matter is, we use summons as much as we possibly can. I think the only times we don't use summons are when they're just literally not effective at all. The fact that they're AoE, they seem to do more damage almost all the time than our limit breaks. I don't really think that this is something I'm ever going to prioritize. I mean, it would have to be really, really unique content that required very specific things for me to want to prioritize this. Yes, these damage boosts can get huge, but I think if you focused on elemental damage for the summon or, the other boosts, you're going to do better damage and it's going to be more worth your time. And now probably the most controversial one here is boost crit potency. And this is again where I will say it really depends on the content you're playing. Why? Because ultimately I think for, most crisis dungeons, this is sort of trash. And I know that might seem like a hot take to some people. Take it to the comments, tell me everything you think about it and why I'm wrong. But here's my opinion. Right now, any weapon ability that crits or has the ability to crit is a 10% chance to crit. So that means 1 out of 10 times using that ability on average, you'll get a crit. And yes, when it hits, if you've got the boost crit potency, let's say you've, really maxed it out, you even got it to level 6, yeah, you're doing double damage. But you're only doing double damage 1 out of every 10 times. So if you think about that, on average, it's adding 10% damage to your overall DPS, because 100% here divided by 10, because it's only going to happen 1 out of 10 times, is just 10. 100 divided by 10 is 10. So 10% is what, and you have to get this many points in it to work. Now, if you're going against a single boss and you're good with beating it based on RNG, that could work really well. If you're having trouble, like, some of like the waltz runs or other things like that, where it becomes a DPS race and you just need to get in that damage, I think this is a perfect time to go crit potency, because maybe you could use a little bit of luck. And if you happen to get 1 or 2, I mean, it's possible to even hit like 3 big crits towards the end, that's going to clear the content. But for something like a crisis dungeon where you're doing more and more and more fights, I think consistency is more valuable than RNG, because the RNG isn't going to give you as much luck over a sustained period of time as it will for one boss or one fight. The overall likelihood is that the longer a fight goes, or the more fights you have to do, the more abilities that are cast, the more that RNG is going to equal out to that 10% chance, thus making these numbers just not nearly as important or as valuable as the other ones. So these are my R ability, I wouldn't call it a tier list, but my rankings, what I think about them. If you found this video helpful, subscribe for future content. I appreciate everybody's support, and as always, thanks for watching.